Välkomna till Se människan-scenen, Svenska kyrkans scen här på Bokmässan. We are very glad to welcome Gemma Hartley to our stage. Gemma har skrivit en bok som på svenska heter Så jävla trött. Gemma kommer att samtala med Cristina Grenholm, kyrkosekreterare och genusvetare. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, I've been reading your book when traveling. And when traveling and professionally dressed, people have thought, oh, they have looked at me. Because it's quite a strong title in Swedish. It's stronger than the fed up. But the thing is, of course, that you point to that women are tired. And why is that? And it seems like it's not because we spend early mornings fixing things or late nights being awake for our kids are awake. But it is emotional work that makes us so tired. Can you please explain?
Yes, so I mean, I'm sure that the domestic labor and childcare also makes us tired, but I think that women, especially now, are carrying a really large mental load and doing a lot of emotional work in the family that they often carry alone. And so they are the ones responsible for making sure that everything gets done around the house, making sure everything runs smoothly, and doing all of the invisible steps that are needed in order to keep everyone around them comfortable and happy. And that type of work can be very exhausting and very isolating.
And you don't separate the mental work really from the actual work, but you keep them together in this concept of emotional work. Why is that?
Well, in the book, I make a pretty sharp distinction between what domestic labor is and what emotional labor is, because the actual physical labor I don't think of as a part of this term. I only think of the emotion work and the mental work as contributing to this specifically, which is an expanded definition of emotional labor, where it used to only apply to the emotion work done, especially in a job setting, like being a flight attendant and having to suppress your own emotions to cater to the emotions of others and to make sure that everyone stays comfortable, happy, calm. You know, they don't think about the fact that they're flying through the air and could fall out at any moment, you know, in their minds. But this expanded definition of emotional labor has been around for quite a few years, since around 2015, talking about the emotional work that we do in our personal lives and what it feels like to be the one responsible for everyone around you, to have your emotions sort of quelled in order to take care of others.
So a key issue is that you want to keep everybody happy, that you take responsibility not just for isolated things, but for the whole machinery in a family. And then, of course, you can think, just stop doing some things. And you say it is not as easy as that, because this emotional work that women do is not because we thought it's good if I do it. It is because we are all framed by a patriarchal script. So how do you think that patriarchal script gets into even family life?
I mean, I think it gets into every part of our life. You can't escape, you know, the culture that you grow up in. And the culture that we all grow up in is a patriarchal one. And so these things, you know, that we think that we're aware of the patriarchy and all the ways that it affects our lives, but it took me a long time to come to this term, emotional labor, and to understand that the root causes were not that, like, me and my husband are terrible communicators, or that, he wanted to put all of this emotional labor on me or anything like that. But we had grown up in a patriarchy, and we had these preconceived notions of what each of us were going to do. And so that's very tricky to overcome.
Yes, and your book, it started actually with an article that you wrote that became viral. Was that one of the moments when you understood that, wow, this is really a structural issue?
I don't think I realized it then. I think the Mother's Day that sort of inspired that article, it was a moment of clarity for me when I realized this is what makes it so frustrating. Not only that I am, having to ask my husband to do everything in the home, or else nothing gets done, or I have to do it all myself, but it wasn't a moment of realizing like, oh, this is a deep structural issue that, like I was not in that mindset of thinking about the patriarchy and how it was playing out in my relationship. That came much later while researching the book and sort of trying to figure out why it was that we were having this imbalance when we were in a progressive relationship and we always thought of ourselves in that framework. And I was trying to figure out how we missed it.
Yes, you quote somebody in your book who describes very well that this kind of flows in without you really taking notice. She says, it doesn't feel right, but not shockingly wrong either. That you do, or you tend to get into this pattern that you may have inherited from your mother and your mother's mother.
Yes, it's very easy to fall into these patterns. And I think, a lot of the time, I think one of the big problems for me was that there hasn't been language to talk about emotional labor, especially in this way that envelops the mental load and the emotion work and the ways that they intersect and compound. So I just sort of went along knowing that there was frustration, knowing that there was resentment, but not really being able to put my finger on why. And so it was very easy to have one thing stack on top of the other, on top of the other, until it was a much larger problem, because I could not recognize it as it was happening.
But you also have another quote that shows how this connects to very serious things in women's lives, from Margaret Atwood, that men are afraid that women shall laugh at them, while women are afraid that men will kill them. So you see that there is this structural pattern is also a very dangerous pattern, and you also write about poisonous male gender roles.
Yes, and I started writing about emotional labor, writing about these seemingly insignificant problems within my own relationship, which is already a very good one. But looking at the imbalance that we had, looking at why I was the one expected to do the emotional labor, led into a much deeper discussion about why women are expected to do emotional labor and why society expects that of us and what it costs to be the ones that are expected to keep everyone comfortable and happy, to suppress our emotions in order to keep things running smoothly. And that really helps to perpetuate patriarchal society and even rape culture when we are talking about, women are the ones that are responsible for their own victimhood often. And we expect them to employ emotional labor to the best of their abilities. And when that's not enough, it still falls on them.
True, and very important to come to grips with. At some point, you mention the role of Christianity in keeping this patriarchal system alive. What is your take on that?
Well, I think my experience has been probably very different. I've had some talks with people here about the Church of Sweden and how different it is from sort of the conservative Christianity that we have in the States, which is a very patriarchal structure, and it works very actively to maintain patriarchy. And so for me, growing up in that environment, I very much took to heart that this was my role, and this was my, God-given nature to do the emotional labor, to fulfill this as my best and highest purpose. Writing feminist books, not your best and highest purpose. But taking care of everyone around you is, what brings you honor and what, brings you closer to God. And I think that there is room for both men and women to come closer to their humanity through doing emotional labor, and that it does not need to all come down to women.
No, but of course, Christianity has this strand of very patriarchal, very conservative issues, and I don't think it has gone away, not even in Church of Sweden, but definitely not in a broad perspective. But we should also remind ourselves that many women have taken their starting point in the Bible, in the first chapter, where we are said to be also created as the image of God. And many women have thought, well, I am the image of God as well as the men are images of God, so I do have rights. I do have a right to speak. I do have a right to exist, not just below everybody else. So I think Christianity has worked in both ways.
I think it can, and I think it definitely does. I would love to see more of that in the U.S.
So would I. So would we. But I think, and I heard you say also that in many ways, what you describe in your book is very American.
Yes.
How would it resonate here? And I've met people who think, well, this is very American. We are far away from this. But I've also met many women around me who have said, well, this is anyway still how it is. Although our structures are so different, the parental leave that we are sharing in this country has been of immense importance, of course. So what is your thoughts on how patriarchy can be preserved also when you see the structures are different?
Yeah, I actually found it very surprising when I heard that my book was going to be translated into Swedish, and I'm like, oh, are they going to just, look at it and say, oh, look how bad the United States is doing. Their feminism is terrible there. Their structures are non-existent in order to facilitate equality, which is true. But I was surprised by how widely this was resonating across different countries, because I did write this book, very much from an American perspective. And I had this, sort of vision that if we were to change our structures, because we often look to Sweden as that beacon of light of what parental leave could look like, what childcare could look like, all of these things that we pine for in the US. And I thought, oh gosh, if we had all that, wouldn't this not be an issue? And apparently not, because I think there is still patriarchy in our culture. And I think that takes a lot longer to, fight back against than we realize. And structural change can only do so much. We have to address it on a personal level as well.
Yes, I agree. Still more work to be done. You identify becoming a parent or becoming parents as a couple is where it tips. And many have experienced that. And I think that how we understand being a mother plays a great role there that is very difficult. And Charlotte Perkins Gilman, she once said, anyone can be a mother. An oyster can be a mother. The difficult thing is to be a person.
Yes, that's a very good quote.
And then she, you can ponder on this and what is being a person, and I've been using Paula Cooey, who is a feminist theologian, and she says that being a mother, the ideal of a mother, that means that you cannot be vulnerable to moral and emotional complexity. And I think being a person is very much being vulnerable to moral and emotional complexity. So maybe that is also a fight to take, this with the ideal mother.
Yes, I have a lot of thoughts about that because, motherhood and the idea of motherhood really is meant to eclipse personhood. Mm-hmm. It's meant to eclipse who you were before when we talk about motherhood in a cultural sense. And so I think that that really plays into this, the idea of what a mother should be. What should a mother do? And a mother is supposed to be nurturing and caring and noticing all of these details. We are supposed to be all in on the emotional labor. And I think when you have children, that's unavoidable. I mean, they need you in a way that, a partner is not going to need you to do all of these things. If you drop the ball with your partner, they'll eventually pick up the slack or they'll go without. But a child, you don't have that option.
I want to show you a picture. You may have seen it. Is it behind me now? What do you think when you see it? Is this forbidden? Should this not happen?
Well, I mean, I only have one daughter, so I don't confuse her name, but I've definitely called my sons by the wrong name before.
This is, you begin your book by speaking about Mother's Day and what you expected from that and from your husband, and he did not quite understand what you wanted. This is also from Mother's Day. It was a card given to me by my daughter. And it was a very deep expression of love inside. It goes back to a story she claims is true, that I brought the wrong girl home from daycare, and I swear I did not. I discovered it on the way somewhere. But I think this, sometimes we say that being a good enough mother, a good enough couple, a good enough family is what we should strive for. Do you agree with that? Being good enough is enough?
I do and I don't. I think, good enough can be good enough. At the same time, part of writing this book was that things were more than good enough, but I knew that they could be better. I knew that there could be more connection and there could be a deeper understanding of one another's lives. So I think that good enough can be good enough unless you want more.
Would you accept a good enough surgeon?
No, probably not.
I'm just thinking maybe good enough mothers or good enough parents. It's just mirroring the fact that we have, I'm always saying, unnatural or too wide expectations of the ideal parent, of the ideal mother. And maybe good mothering is good enough, good parenting is good enough.
Oh, I think when it comes to parenting, good enough should definitely be good enough. I've actually recently been writing exactly on this topic of, my husband, he knows when good enough is good enough when it comes to parenting. And with me, I envy that certainty because I feel like the answer to that for women is often it's never enough. Good enough is never good enough. And I think we have that within ourselves from, all of the messages that we absorb, and we get it from outside sources as well. And so it's really hard to escape that. Whereas my husband, he knows when he is being a good father.
I think that in your book, you reveal how you worked yourself with your husband through this. I was expecting really that when you found out that this is the way my marriage worked, you would leave. But you stayed on, and I'm glad you did, and I'm sure your family is. And you changed things in your lives, and I just want to end by saying that you have a very optimistic ending in your book. Yes. That you hope that this is the generation that you are now parenting, that will be able to lead a good new life without this emotional, unbalanced labor. Is that still your take on it, or do you think we have more to do?
You know, it is my take now more than ever. I think after publishing this book and hearing from other people and the ways that they have been able to have these conversations and make these changes, I absolutely have hope for the future. I think for a long time we went without language for this, and we went without seeing it because the work is largely invisible. It takes place, you know, in our minds and our hearts. And so it's hard to quantify, but we're starting to take a look at it and, you know, demanding that everyone look at the work that we're doing, that they deem it as valuable. And I think that's going to make a huge difference for the next generation. I really do.
Thank you very much, Gemma. Keep on keeping on.
Thank you.